So today we're arguing for Edward de Vere, who we think is the true author of all the Shakespeare plays and poems and sonnets. Who wrote the works of Shakespeare? It's hard to believe that Shakespeare wrote all the documents that it said he wrote. William Shakespeare grew up an uneducated boy who never got a single day of schooling. But yet we are told he began publishing work in his early 20s with no other work to be documented before then. My partner and I say no. We don't believe that William Shakespeare wrote any of these documents, and all the credit should be given to a well-educated man, Edward de Vere. Therefore, we stand resolved that the works of William Shakespeare should be attributed to Edward de Vere. At this time, we would like to offer the following definitions: exquisite, extremely beautiful and typically delicate; vivacious, attractively lively and animated. My partner and I believe that Edward de Vere is the true author of the works that are traditionally attributed to William Shakespeare for the following reasons. According to the Shakespeare Mystery, Edward de Vere was a well-educated man unlike Shakespeare. It is not documented that Shakespeare attended a single day of school. It is believed he did not know how to read or write. William wrote one well-documented document, which was his will, and in that will it said nothing about any poems or sonnets. His name was written multiple times, but each time spelled differently. The Shakespeare plays and poems had certain works of literature which tied to the Elizabeth's court, according to a biography did on Edward de Vere. Edward de Vere was the courtier of Queen Elizabeth, which had ties to he was the courtier of the Queen, and that was the way many of the poems and plays were written. De Vere was raised as a ward of Queen Elizabeth in the home of Lord Berkeley. All but one, The Merry Wives of Windsor, of the 37 plays are set in courtly or wealthy society. The noble characters are all natural, convincing, and at ease. They speak the language of their class. Throughout the plays, every character through whom the author speaks on social or political issues is of noble birth or privileged position. The world Shakespeare wrote about was the world de Vere and his court audience knew. It is Shakespeare's lower order characters which are unconvincing. Almost all of them are clods or clowns. Even their names are undignified, such as Wart, Bottom, Dogberry, Snout. Based on a bibliography on Edward de Vere, he was a phenomenal college student. De Vere's early tutors were the scholar slash diplomat Sir Thomas Smith and Lawrence Noel, owner of the only known copy of Beowulf at the time. De Vere went to Queen's College, Cambridge in 1558, later receiving honorary degrees from both Cambridge and Oxford University. The plays demonstrate a highly educated mind with a feudal, aristocrat view of society. They are full of detailed references to lordly pastimes and sports, and also showed a detailed knowledge of the law and of foreign languages. De Vere studied law at Gray's Inn after completing his education at Cambridge. The records of his education, whilst living in the Berkeley household, show him to have been equipped to be an outstanding scholar, highly proficient in the classics and French. The plays were written through to what seems a nobleman. The quality of the works and the exquisite workmanship of the poetry, as we know, have it make it difficult to believe that they were produced under pressure for immediate performance on a public stage, but rather that they were first drafted out, then refined and perfected over a period of years, probably away from the pressures of production or publication. There are shadowy references to court plays by de Vere, but on in the 1570s, which could be early versions of plays which subsequently appeared as Shakespeare's. If Shakespeare of Stratford were the author, he would have been writing for a company of actors and thus providing plays not much in advance of their first performance. If they were written by de Vere, the plays would not have been written in such conditions, but rather for private performance at court, and subsequently revised into their present literary form. Indeed, it has been established that 2/3 of all documented performances of Shakespeare's plays were not in the public theaters, but either at court, the Inns of Court, and at Oxford and Cambridge universities. When they were written, it would have no direct link with when they were first performed or published, like John Lyly's plays. They could well have been written many years before they were actually published. The credit should be given to Edward de Vere. My partner and I want to see an injustice of mistaken identity rectified. I honestly think they should change the point in time so that everybody knows who actually wrote the many sonnets and poems written. I am open now for any questions pertaining to any of the information above.
Yes, so what was your contention? What was your third contention?
Based on a bibliography on Edward de Vere, he was a phenomenal college student. Any other questions?
No. My partner and I would like to present the case for William Shakespeare. While some have suggested that the plays Shakespeare wrote were in fact the work of another individual, for many scholars and Shakespeare enthusiasts alike, there is little doubt that William Shakespeare was the author of each of his 38 plays. In addition to his other literary offerings, to support this view, the following arguments have been made. My partner and I believe that William Shakespeare should not be confused with any other writer for the following reasons. Evidence for Shakespeare is taken from absolute Shakespeare. Evidence of the Bard have written his plays coming from the first folio in 1623. This book compiled 36 of William Shakespeare's plays, recording and publishing them for the first time. Its co-author, John Hemmings, was also a shareholder of the Globe and belonged to the same acting company, the Lord Chamberlain's men later named the King's Men, as did Shakespeare, and so would have been private to the true author. In 1610, and in a publication with the title The Scourge of Folly, John Davis's poem To Our English Terence, Mr. William Shakespeare, clearly identified William Shakespeare as a playwright, the word Terence referring to an ancient Roman playwright by the same name. Proof can be found in his works. The majority of the plays bear his name on the title page, including subsequent editions of the same play, albeit with some variations, such as Shake-Speare instead of Shakespeare, for example. Shakespeare, although a commoner, had received a sufficiently good education that included some subjects as classics, rhetoric, history, and Latin grammar, in order to be able to write such literary works, more than enough schooling in order to write these plays. And other people's criticisms. Criticisms by other playwrights also suggested he authored his work. Why else would Robert Greene, in his 1592 pamphlet, Greene's Groat's Worth of Wit, criticize the famous bard as an upstart crow, who borrowed ideas for his plays from other playwrights? The playwright did not write his own plays. Ben Jonson, his rival and friend, also criticized the work in Timber, or Discoveries of 1640. Francis Meres criticized the bard's work as mellifluous and honey-tongued in his 1598 Palladis Tamia. Similarly, Samuel Pepys ruthlessly described in 1595 A Midsummer Night's Dream as the most insipid, ridiculous play that he ever saw in his life. Similarly, we know the bard at least wrote some of his plays because one of his later works, The Noble Kinsman, wrote in 1613, was recorded in the station's registry in 1634 as being the work of both Shakespeare and noted dramatist John Fletcher. The opinions of those who would take away the authorship from a great man such as Shakespeare are ludicrous. Even through the passage of time, it is time to stop questioning and give Shakespeare the respect his genius deserves, which is why me and my partner believe William Shakespeare should be given credit for his plays. Thank you. I will now be open for questions.
What was your second and third contention?
The second contention was proof can be found in his works. And the third is other people's criticisms.
Other people's criticisms?
Yes. Is there any other questions?
So to rebuild on their attacks, I would say, against us, the first one, they said the time isn't right when, like, saying he wasn't able to write during that time because he would have been far too young. But in fact, he graduated from college at the age of 14 and then again from law school at the age of 18. For the second contention, he was a very. It says in his biography that he was a very good writer and publisher of many of the sonnets and works that he did, which would counter them saying there was no proof he was good at writing at all. And there was, if I'm not mistaken, there was a couple plays that did come out before or after Edward de Vere died, but they could have been in like the making to being published as Edward de Vere's work, but William Shakespeare is taking credit for it, or they're giving William Shakespeare credit for it, I would guess. And that's it.
In the rebuttals by our opponents in this case, I do have one for the rebuttal of the Shakespeare possibly being blind around the time he would have written, or the folios would have been put together, or he would have written them, is that the folios came out after Shakespeare died, put together by two of his colleagues, John Hemmings and Henry Condell, in respect for their deceased friend, and it also shows hints of tampering with the manuscripts and whatnot, most likely republishing and re-editing works of Shakespeare. So it wouldn't matter if Shakespeare was blind around the time he would have written the plays, because they weren't published until several years after his death. And now I don't have any arguments against his uneducation. I don't know if it's proved true or not. That's all I have against the rebuttals. Thank you.
Okay. For the summary, we believe that Edward was the author. Edward de Vere was the author of the works of Shakespeare because he had higher education than what William Shakespeare did at the time. It's not documented that William attended a day of school, so there is no proof that William Shakespeare can read or write.
Okay, for our summary, I believe William Shakespeare is the writer of his plays. For the timing is wrong, and he may have been uneducated, but there's no proof that he could not write. He was a genius shown in his 38 plays. Edward de Vere was a college man who other writers should show no interest of his writing, but and that is our summary. So I believe that that William Shakespeare is the writer of his plays and not Edward de Vere.